Welcome to the Maintainable Software Podcast, where we explore the art of improving existing software with seasoned practitioners who have helped organizations overcome the problems often associated with technical debt and legacy code. I'm your host, Robby Russell. On this episode, Saron Yitbarek, who is a multi-hyphenate, founder of Code Newbie, is a developer, speaker, podcaster, and is currently CEO of Disco Club. Saron joins us from San Diego, California, in the United States. Saron Yitbarek, we're so glad to have you join us on Maintainable. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So as you reflect on your career in our industry, what do you believe are a few common characteristics of, dare I say, well-maintained software?
So this is something that I actually have been thinking a lot about recently because I've been working, I'm founder of Disco, a startup for people with multiple streams of income, and we're creating our first software product called DiscoLink, and we're working on the MVP of it, and so far I've been working on it on my own. So I have no rules. I can do whatever I want. No one's seen my code. I can make it ugly. I can make it fast. I can make it dirty, and no one knows. And recently I decided that I needed some help on the product, and I decided to hire somebody. And he's actually starting tomorrow. And so now that I am bringing on a developer, all of a sudden, I have to think about maintainability and processes and systems and documentation and all of that. So he's an experienced developer. He was CTO at his former startup, first founder, then became CTO, managed a team of people. So he has, I'm sure, lots of opinions on maintainability and what he thinks we should do. But for me, one of the things that I'm thinking about when I think about maintainable software is not just literally how does the code work, but why does the code work that way and how does it relate to our users and our mission as a company? One of the things that I'm working on today is gathering all the documents that onboard him and teach him about the company and teach him about why we decided to build certain features and why the Stripe integration works the way that it does, and why are we okay dealing with this bug for now, and it's not actually that urgent. And what I'm realizing is there are, at least at this stage in the product, because it's so new, there's so many decisions that I made as a solo developer that go back to the business fundamentals and the business reasons. And so one of the things that I think helps make code maintainable and also empowering is providing context, and I don't know if documentation is the right word, but I guess documentation on not just literally the code, but why you even decided to write the code. And I guess one thing that I'm trying to figure out is, where does that live? Is that just in meetings? Is that just conversations that you have? Is it in Google Docs or Notion docs that tell you, here's the explanation for these features? Is it comments in your code base? That doesn't feel quite right. I feel like comments should be more focused on like the literal code, not so much the context around the code. Is it the README? Is that where that lives? So I'm not really sure where it lives, but I think a big part of maintainability is helping your teammates understand why you made those decisions, and in hopes of sharing and spreading the values you care about and understanding the logic behind the business logic as well. Because what you want is for them to make similar decisions in the right vein when you're not there. Especially with me as a two-person team, he's oftentimes going to operate as a solo developer. I'm going to be coding a lot less. He's going to be coding more. And so I want him to be confident in the decisions that he makes in terms of what direction to take a feature and how to approach things without needing to ask me necessarily. So how do I share with him my thinking and my process and my logic so that it empowers him to make good coding decisions moving forward?
I think that's a interesting time for the audience. I did not know that like someone's literally starting tomorrow to pick up a project. So this is interesting type of thing to think about. And like, how do you transfer knowledge, context, bring on someone else, and I'm assuming, and work in a similar way that share your values and your maybe guiding principles of how your team's going to work together and how it's probably going to evolve a little bit as they really get in there, I would imagine. So I'm assuming you probably try to find someone that's going to help offset some of your strengths and your weaknesses in certain areas and be like, hey, actually, can you do this stuff maybe even better than I, or spend more time doing certain things than I have time as I'm leading the organization forward. And like, this is how I've got to start it and how we need collectively to go. There's going to be some interesting trade-offs there, imagine, to kind of navigate and thinking about where you're going to document this stuff, where you're going to maintain your documentation, and you might have different opinions. You might already be thinking through, it sounds like already, but then like as they come in and like trying to navigate that together. So it's a lot of things to start thinking about early on in a project. I'm curious, you do like, is this kind of like you're in an MVP period still phase, or are you kind of a little bit beyond that? How would you kind of classify that right now?
No, we're still MVP right now. We narrowed down our set of features, and I'm actually doing user interviews this week to kind of get a little bit more confidence around what that first feature set should be. I'm hoping the feedback I get is not too far off from what I have already built. But if that turns out to not be the case, that's fine. We'll build some new stuff and it'll be all right. But yeah, we're definitely MVP stage. So right now we have one very patient user that we've onboarded just to kind of test like the bare minimum concept and just to kind of get the idea going, and gotten some really good feedback from her. And now we are hoping to onboard another small group of users, like 5-10 people, based on what we build, and trying to grow from there. So still feels very early, very new, but yeah, still MVP.
But you've already got things like Stripe sorted out, at least the initial version.
Yeah.
So you have a monetization approach there, so which is more than I can say about a lot of organizations that I talk about in the MVP phase. Like, we'll get there eventually. I'm like, how are you making money?
Yeah, exactly. You got to collect the money. That was like the first thing I implemented.
Which is one of the reasons that I really wanted to have you on the podcast. Because what I wanted to do, like we often talk with developers about thinking about their careers as well, and like how, whether they're individual contributors, maybe going down the management track, or have had developers that had gone down the management track and have decided, I actually miss being an individual contributor, or like I really like to find some sort of hybrid role in an organization or something. And then I speak with a lot of different people that also have different career trajectories where they're like, well, I'm no longer doing a lot of coding. Now I'm educating people, or now I'm writing books about things, or speaking at conferences. And these are things that I know that you do. Things like, in particular, like we met recently at a conference because we were both speaking there, and you were helping host the event and one of the speakers there at Berlin, The Merge. And so we got to talking a little bit, and I learned a little bit more about your business and some of the the things you're working on there. And you talked a lot about money, and in particular, like developers should talk more about it. So before I give too much away, maybe you can tell us a little bit about like why you're focused on helping developers make money with multiple streams of income. Because a lot of people think about their career being like, well, I'm going to work at one job, and then if I want to make more money, I get a new job, and I got to get another job. And you're always thinking like, at some point I'm going to keep making more money than I was before. And whether that pans out to be accurate over the course of a career is another topic. But I'm just curious, like, what prompted this to kind of go down this path, and what sort of ways are you making that happen for people?
Yeah, absolutely. So this interest in multiple streams of income has kind of came about in January of this year. So it's relatively recent. And I was feeling very stuck in my startup. I'd spent a couple years trying a bunch of different ideas. Nothing was really getting any traction. Nothing really connected with people. And I felt very just kind of overwhelmed, and none of my ideas were working out. And instead of thinking about the idea, I decided to instead focus on the type of person I wanted to help. And I knew that there were lots of people, especially in tech, who come from a level of expertise in their industry and translated that into different streams of income. So they were a developer in their day jobs, but they did speaking, and they did it for money. They had a course and they got paid for that. They had a TikTok and they got some sponsors from that. And so there were all these people who had multiple streams of income. And if I look at my career, I've always had multiple streams of income. I've always done podcasting, and so the sponsorships there. I've done a speaking. Most of my speaking gigs are paid speaking gigs. I've done a paid newsletter before. And so I've done consulting. And so I've always had more than one income stream. And that has been a very big part of me building my financial stability and being a little bit more secure, getting ready to have a baby because babies are very expensive. And so that all kind of contributed to life being a little bit easier. And I decided that that was the community I wanted to create and support. People who wanted to do something like that or were already doing something like that, who wanted to turn the side income into serious cash. And so I started this community and it was called Big Cash Money. I thought was like a fun kind of, in your face way of saying like, hey, I care about money and that's okay. There's no shame in that. And it was a free community. It was Discord. It offered coaching and some weekly events, 2 per week. One was a Monday stand-up and a Friday retro, and it was all done asynchronously. And we ran that for about 6 months, and it got more traction than I expected, and we got really good feedback from it. And initially when I created it, it was meant to be R&D. It was meant to be research and development for me to understand this consumer a little bit better, figure out what they needed, and see if I could build a software product to help support them and their needs. That was kind of the idea. But the more that we worked together with this community, the more I realized that this could be a product in and of itself. And so we decided to launch a paid version of the community, which offered different levels of coaching. It offered a mastermind group, so an accountability group of 4 to 5 people that meets every 2 weeks. It offers the 2 weekly events that we have. We also have a private newsletter for the community. We have a masterclass every month. We have AMAs where we bring in guest speakers who are very successful every month. And so we do all these different events for our community. We have online mixers. We're going to do like a peer-led working session on different topics. And so it was a way to say, we're going to help inspire you, educate you, get you excited about making money and do it in a transparent and open way. And so we launched that about 2 months ago, and we got a cohort of about 70 people who joined, and that went really well. And now we're currently open for applications again for our September cohort, and we're doing like monthly applications now. So we'll be open, I'm sure, when this goes live as well. And it's just been a really great way to say, there is no shame in wanting to be financially secure. At the end of the day, I mean, the money goes usually back into the family. It goes into a better house, a better neighborhood, a better childcare, better schooling, activities for the kids. You know what I mean? Like, goes to good places. It's reinvested back in communities and back in neighborhoods and families. And so I'm really proud of the work of helping people make more money. And so, yeah, that's what we've been up to.
Hey folks, it's me, Robby. I want you to take a moment and close your eyes. Now picture your code and your applications as a symphony. Now to keep that symphony playing smoothly, you need an orchestra of tools. That's where our podcast sponsor, AppSignal, takes center stage. They combine the elegance of error tracking, the precision of performance monitoring, and the harmony of logging into one symphonic suite. Whether you're composing with Ruby, jamming with Elixir, orchestrating with Node.js, or harmonizing with Python, or maybe even a little bit of flourish of JavaScript, AppSignal's got the sheet music for you. And here's the crescendo. Plans start at just $23 US a month. That's gotta be music to your budget's ears. Plus they're certified ISO 27001 and they dance the GDPR and HIPAA compliance beats. So don't miss a beat, my friends. Head on over to appsignal.com and tell them that your good friend Robby from Maintainable sent you. Now, open your eyes and let the symphony of smooth coding begin. Let's get back to our show. That's great. One of the things I've been curious about is, I've talked to some people that are like, well, I have a full-time job and I think about doing something, but like, when would I have extra time to do this? So are you seeing that a lot of people that you're working with in your communities or your cohorts so far are looking to primarily, in addition to what they're kind of doing as a typical, I'm air quoting, a day job, but so anyways, the idea of being like, you have your day job and these are some additional things that you could do to generate additional revenue, or are you seeing people like, no, this is actually, I'm hoping that I can get to do this new thing, so that's my side hustle thing until at some point this becomes my primary thing, and then I can maybe reduce how much I need to do for my day job? Or is it, you think at the multiple, is a big emphasis on, no, the goal is to have multiple streams of revenue, and if you try to just get, your goal is to get to one, then you're kind of deviating a little bit. And do you have any sort of philosophy on that
That's a great question. So initially when we did the free version of BCM, we divided people up by where they were in their journeys. So we had one group that was purely aspirational. They hadn't started anything yet. They just thought about it and they had goals to start, but they hadn't actually pulled the trigger. Then there are the group of people who were doing it purely on the side and they had a day job. And then there was the group of people who were more solopreneurs. So they had a business, they were usually consultants or coaches, and they were doing their own thing full time. And within their own thing, were also adding on sides of income. And what has been very interesting is those lines that we established were not nearly as important as we thought they were. Throughout the life of the cohorts, people moved, right? They moved buckets, they moved categories. People who we thought were all in on the solopreneur, one day they were like, maybe I should get a job. That kind of feels a lot easier than what I'm doing. And so they went to get a job. We had people who were laid off and took that opportunity to say, you know what, I'm going to stay without a day job and I'm just going to work for myself and just see how that goes. And so far it's been working out pretty well. So those lines are not as important to people as we thought they were. They move and cross those lines very fluidly. I think there's this mentality around the solopreneur community that feels very like, down with the man. No, no job for me. I don't work for it. They don't own my time. Like there's a very like kind of antagonistic attitude towards day jobs that a lot of kind of like the hustle, solopreneur, creator lifestyle kind of has. And we found that our community doesn't feel that way. They see a day job as a means to an end. In a lot of situations, it makes a lot of sense. You get especially if you're working tech, if you're a developer, you're a CTO, you're an engineering manager, you get a nice, reliable, steady, relatively large paycheck every month, every 2 weeks, and you work generally 9 to 5. And you still have time to spend with the kids. You still have time to spend on your newsletter. You can still start a YouTube channel. So for a lot of people, that day job is the way that they create stability while still having room to add additional layers of income for that extra spending money, to create an emergency fund, to make that buffer a little bit bigger, that kind of thing. So people do not feel as strict about it as they should. And you ask kind of like what my philosophy is. I think day jobs are awesome. I think day jobs are great, especially if you have a day job where you're working for people that you like, where your manager supports you, where it's healthy. I think toxic environments can absolutely ruin your life. But if you have a healthy day job that pays a decent salary, I think that can give you very good predictability. That can give you that baseline, like it covers your bases so that you can then make extra money through content, through courses, through consulting, through other things. So I think having a day job is very strategic.
I think back to, this is resonating with me in an earlier era of my career where I had the day job and I was like, I want to go work for myself and damn the man type of situation. 23 years since I've had I'm air quoting boss again. And here's the thing about, you brought up the thing about solopreneurs and kind of like the side hustle. There's this challenge that I've had, and this is something I wasn't thinking about I was going to talk about on the podcast, but your identity becomes part of what you are in a way. And like early on, I think, and you're trying to figure out who you are in the world. And so if you work for someone, then you might have some sense of like, my identity is kind of tied to this corporation that I'm working with. Like I ended up working in a cubicle in Silicon Valley. Like that was like my biggest goal in the late 90s was like, I don't want to do that. I'm going to rebel against my dad. Like he wanted me to work in Silicon Valley and I'm like, I have no interest in that. I'm going to go be a musician or something. And like, screw that. I didn't. And so I moved away from the Silicon Valley so that I wouldn't get a job there. I'm like, nope, I moved to Portland. I'm going to go do my own thing. I didn't know that you could work in tech and work in a cool little savvy, creative, like office space with people and like, oh, there was like a whole world I didn't know. But for a long time, I also then found my edit when I started doing my own thing and I started having employees. I was this, 25-year-old kid basically trying to figure out how to run a business. But people are like, oh, you're this young entrepreneur. And like, that became my identity. So the idea of ever getting a job again was just like, I can't do that because like, then I'll feel like I failed at doing this solo running my own business thing. somehow it survived, probably because of ignorance, but I was able to get through that. So I just think if it's, when people are thinking about their career, there's a lot of people like, I'm going to go do my own thing. And then I'm always like, are you doing that because you actually really want to? Because I'm like, I know that I can't transfer my knowledge of like, it's actually a lot of work to do your own thing. And to try to, I would have loved to have predictable revenue, but I've had to think about predictable revenue for myself and for my employees for decades now. And it's just like, whew, are you sure you want to do that? So when people get excited about like their new business idea, I'm like, why would you do that? Why don't you just go get a job and maybe come back? So anyways, I thought that was, one of the things I wanted to was curious to talk with you about was like, if you had that, that you're saying that your communities, the lines are kind of blurry. People are kind of jumping around, and it's a matter of talking about money is a really important thing. And for a long time, I didn't pay myself that much to get by, and that was probably in hindsight one of my biggest regrets, that I would be like, I'll just not pay myself enough that much for a while, and I'll just suck it up because it'll work out at some point, and that's okay to do at times, but it also meant that I was probably paying more for other things that I probably shouldn't have. So I didn't think about how to like navigate and try to come up with multiple revenue streams outside of being like, oh, I'll create a product one day or something. That didn't quite pan out either. So I'm curious, like, as you're thinking about when you're talking with people in your community that are kind of navigating this, are you seeing, I can't imagine that like, this industry might not be able to support everybody becoming a content creator and getting paid another thing. Like, how are you helping people assess whether or not like they've got the chops for that, or is that even just kind of like go do it and experiment with it? And like, how do you talk about like how much people should invest into that sort of thing before I'm not saying give up, but like maybe shift the course a little bit or try something different?
We had a really good conversation about this week, actually, with my head of marketing and community. We were talking about how do we best use content, events, our master classes, etc. How do we best use that to support people and help them grow? And we found that there are really kind of 3 parts to doing this multiple stream of income thing. There is doing the work, right? So if you're building a course, there's literally like writing the script, doing the research, recording the demos, they're editing the video. There's like the work itself, like building the product. Then there is selling and marketing. So there is like the whole idea of getting the word out there, getting customers. And then there is charging. And that's purely about like pricing and how to close the deal, make the sale, ask for the money. There's like the money making part of things. And what we found is that most people in our community are actually pretty good at the product, right? When it comes to making the course, writing the book, creating the software, like they know that's where their expertise comes in. They know what they're doing, they know how to do it, and they have a pretty solid job. Where they struggle is their mindset around money. We deal with a lot of developers who are frankly too scared to charge. There's a lot of fear and anxiety around asking people for money and asking them to pay for your product. They feel guilty about charging. They feel like what they have built isn't worthy of paying for. They feel like it's not ready to pay for. So there's a lot of just like emotional blockers, and it's purely in their heads, right? Like it's not someone looking at their payment page going, what in the hell is this? You know what I mean? Like no one has said anything. Like no one has pushed back. No one has said they're too expensive. No one has said anything. It's purely them feeling anxiety because they're just really nice. They're not used to charging. They're new to this. They're not salespeople. They're builders, right? And especially when we talk about like open source and building, like we are used to giving away things for free. And the idea of charging feels wrong, or at least uncomfortable. So money is a big thing that we try to tackle just by talking more about it, just by saying, this is what I charge. This opportunity came to me. I charged for it. Here's what I asked for. And there have been so many opportunities where people have said, oh my goodness, I didn't know I could charge for that. I didn't know I could get paid thousands of dollars to speak at a conference. Thank you for telling me. Now that I know that you got paid thousands of dollars, I'm going to ask for thousands of dollars. And there you go. Now you got a new line of income. So I think that there is a lot of just transparency and sharing information that I think is really important in helping people get their mindset just in a better place when it comes to money. So that's one thing. The other avenue is marketing and selling, and that's all about spreading the word, getting more followers, getting engagement on your content marketing, getting views, getting referrals, putting together testimonials. And there's just like a whole world of marketing for multi-hyphenates that I'm very excited to dig into. So one of my goals, and we do this with our master classes, one of my goals is to do a series of workshops on marketing, on how do you get more people to see your thing. If you have no followers, if you have a small subscriber base, how do you spread the word? How do you get more people to do it? And that's something that I'm really hoping to talk to more people about and just get more content around that.
For those listening that might not be familiar with the term, what does multi-hyphenated mean?
Yeah, so one of the things that we've struggled with is figuring out what to call these people. They're people with multiple streams of income who are professionals, usually at least 5 years of experience under their belt, who are taking their expertise in their profession, in their industry, and turning it into extra streams of revenue. And what we found is they're not really creators, right? Like creators isn't the right term. Creators kind of assumes that you just want to like make YouTube videos all day and like live your life doing like vlogging. And like that's not really that doesn't capture the feeling that we're going for. Solopreneur doesn't fully capture it because a lot of these people are doing it on top of their day job. So it's not a full-time thing for them. So we've been figuring out what we should call it. And multi-hyphenate is a word I came across that's used very frequently in the creative industry. And it's used to describe people who are writers, directors, actors, models. Like they kind of have all these different titles, so that's multi-hyphenated, right? So we use multi-hyphenate to describe our community of people who are more than one thing, right? Who are more than one title and who kind of come together under the umbrella of doing multiple things and wearing different hats.
We'll be back with our interview with Saron in just a moment. Hi, it's me, Robby. I just wanted to take a quick moment to say thank you for listening to the podcast. If you're finding these conversations valuable, please consider sharing a link amongst your peers, writing a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify to help spread the word. I think we're even on YouTube these days. Also, if you think there's somebody I should have on the podcast sometime, shoot me an email to Robby with a Y at maintainable.fm and state your case. And now let's get back to our interview with Saron Yitbarek. Do you think when you're working with people, think much about like a big part of it, because software developers, we can build a lot of things. We all know that like, oh, I could build this or I could do that. And then I've also learned that I'm like, well, that's definitely in my wheelhouse, but can I sell it? Can I market it? And so like you're saying, that is like the big, what do I do? Or how do I offset that? And like, how do I build up those skills myself? Or do I need to partner with someone? Or do I find someone else that's really good at that particular thing and like have like a fractional marketing person to help me promote? Like if I were to work on a book or something, is that something that I'm like, I don't know how to promote the book? Or do I have to get a publisher? As a musician, I struggle with thinking about how do we best promote my band? And then like, that's like a glorified hobby that I spend a lot of money on, but like, I'd like to make some money back from it. And so it's like these other little things that are kind of like adjacent. Like it sounds like maybe you can speak to this with your communities that you're working on right now. But like, is a lot of this stuff primarily tech focused things, or is there space for a musician in that sort of thing to like they can leverage quite a bit of what you're kind of talking about as a community?
Yeah, this is also another thing that we've talked extensively about is who are we for? I think that the term multi-hyphenate can apply to any industry. I think it's any industry, any professional, any person who has years of experience in a particular field. And we do have people in our community who do come from photography or documentary filmmaking or just teaching, but not technical teaching, like elementary school teaching. So we do have people. But I think that one thing we're going to be a little bit more intentional about is how we brand ourselves. And I think we're going to focus on people in tech. I think that is the community that I'm most plugged into, that I'm most familiar with, that I have the most just connections to. And so I think we're going to go all in on people in tech. And if you're not in tech, you're still welcome to join. But I think the focus of our content and our messaging will be people in technology.
Understood. That makes sense. How do you think about, for those that are listening that might be kind of curious about this and thinking, well, I've got my day job and maybe I want to work on something, maybe a side product that relates to stuff that kind of what I do during my day, but there's this kind of balance there between like how much can I talk about when it comes to like intellectual property rights of like, well, what's in my employment agreement versus, we specialize in this one thing and I know a lot about it. And like I probably write a book about this thing that just happens to be some technology. Like, are there people there that, that you're working with and talking about that are kind of like navigating that, like how to talk about this maybe with their employer or not? Or they're just like, well, maybe at some point when I leave, I can then have this other thing that I can kind of talk about more about, like, this is how I can share what I've learned on the job. But, there's that interesting balance there about, when it comes to intellectual property. Or have you not needed to?
That's a really good question. It hasn't really come up yet in our community. I mean, I'm sure people have thought about that and kind of managed that their own way, but it hasn't kind of bubbled up to community conversation yet. But if it does, I'm happy to report back.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, I was actually in one of the Slack groups that I'm in. Someone was asking, and they work for a pretty large tech company, and they're like, well, should I ask? They were asking like in a podcasting channel, like, hey, should I ask my employer, let them know before I start a podcast? Because and then so the feedback was, well, are you going to talk about where you work at? And like, where's that blurry line? Are you doing it on company time? And or not, obviously that's, like, no, I'm doing it my side thing, but I'm like, are you using the company name as part of the credentials for why people should listen to you? And there's that interesting balance there. I can imagine that's probably a lot of people like, well, I don't know if I could probably do that. The company's not going to pay for it, or they're a sponsor it, so it's my thing. But it's kind of an interesting correlation between, I guess, back to that whole identity. And like, I'm the XYZ over at this big company thing, and that can be a reason people will listen to you or follow you online or something. So any thoughts for advice for people navigating that?
I haven't worked for someone in a long time, so I haven't had to think about that. I think even when I was working for someone, I don't think I had started any of my side hustles yet, so I haven't really had to parse that. But I do remember asking Scott Hanselman this question. We had an AMA with him last Tuesday, and his opinion is more on the ethical side of things, where he was like, if you are learning something on the job and using something on the job and then taking that content and making money from it, that is not ethical. And I thought that was kind of interesting, like if he's doing a workshop he works at Microsoft. So if he's doing a workshop for Microsoft on something relating to PowerPoint, and then he takes that same content and then flips it into a workshop that he's now charging for, that is not ethical. So I think a part of the question is, for the legal stuff, that's just a matter of talking to a lawyer or looking at your employment contract and seeing what they say about moonlighting, what they say about other projects, and what they say about IP. But I think part of the conversation is also like, what is the ethical thing to do and what might feel a little funny and what may not. But when in doubt, consult the lawyer is the safest answer, and just kind of see what they say.
Also recently had Scott on the podcast too, and he talked a little bit about how like he's like his podcast has been his thing. So I guess maybe one advice is start a podcast before your next job, so it kind of comes with you. Like, I've been doing this the whole time, but I think if it's an interesting thing, like if you're working on something in your company and you need to integrate with some third-party service, and you spend a bunch of time investing, in figuring out how to get that to work, and then you maybe write some articles about it on your own blog or not. I guess maybe that's another question. It's like, if you publish it on your own blog and you start talking about it for a while, this is really murky territory, I think. And I think it's just probably how well of a relationship do you have with that company, and the legal, the ethical side of that, I don't know, that it's very fuzzy. I don't even think I think I'd have to spend some time to think about that myself. Having said that, another thing I wanted to talk to you about was you've been the host of several podcasts, and I'm curious about what podcasts are you currently working on these days?
Podcast I was working on was the Code Newbie podcast. So my first company, Code Newbie, was a media company for people who were new to coding and new to the technology world. And that company got sold in 2019 to Forum, which runs Dev2 and The Practical Developer. And I was a consultant for Forum for the last 5 years now, continuing to host the podcast, continuing to host Codeland, our annual conference, and they're kind of figuring some stuff out. So I'm not sure what's going to happen to the podcast right now. So I haven't recorded an episode in a few months, and hoping to pick that up again soon.
I'm curious how being a podcast host has impacted you in your career.
It's impacted it greatly in a number of ways. So the podcast is how I was able to do Code Newbie full time, right? Like it paid the bill. It allowed me to support myself. It allowed me to hire some help, hire an assistant person who kind of helped out on a bunch of things. It helped me hire a podcast editor also to take that off my plate. And it was a big reason why Code Newbie was able to be acquired, because we had assets, right? We had not just our tens of thousands of downloads per episode, but we had a backlog of hundreds of podcast episodes. We had a brand, we had a community. And we had, a list of sponsors that, paid to be on our show. And so that was a big reason why we were able to have an acquirable company. It also helped with just networking and connections, because I got to talk to just interesting people, and I got to talk to people from all different backgrounds, different parts of the world as well. We went international quite a few times, and it was a great way to just meet new people, get invited to conferences, make new friends, etc. So it helped just in networking, staying kind of relevant. So yeah, it was big. It was huge.
I can relate to that. So no, that's great. Couple of quick last questions for you before we wrap up. Is there a non-technical, non-software book that you like to recommend to peers?
Oh, yes, actually. So recently I have been really into like food books, like not cookbooks, but like books about the food industry. And there's a book that I read recently that I really liked called Formerly Known as Food. And it's all about the industrial food system and mostly about like processed food and just how like even our milk is processed. Like it's wild, like how the most basic things that we eat that feel like they should be pure and should be just kind of, taken from a plant to your fridge, still go through a number of different processes and additives and stuff. And it got me really interested in just better understanding ingredients and how food is made and what effect it has on our body, and just really understanding that. So it's kind of kicked off. I'm not someone that has a lot of hobbies. I just work all the time. Like I work all the time. I spend time with my daughter. I spend time with my husband, and that's kind of it. Like I don't really do anything else for fun. But recently meaning like literally a day ago, I just got really interested in reading more about food. And so I've been curious about that. And so I've been just researching for fun and just better understanding that. So if you're interested in just kind of like where your food comes from and what effect it has on your body, I recommend Formerly Known as Food. It was a really good read.
Hey folks, it's me, Robby. I just want to take a moment to plug my own company, Planet Argon. Is your organization's web application struggling? Is your team struggling because you've got a lot of technical debt and you're just not quite sure where to start? Planet Argon is a software consultancy. Yes, we are. We help companies with existing applications make them better and more maintainable. Maybe you need a little bit of guidance. You just need someone to come in and be like, start over here. This is how we would help you approach that. Get in touch, planetargon.com. We specialize in technologies such as Laravel, React, Ruby on Rails, just to name a few. Again, planetargon.com. Let's get back to our show. Excellent. I'll definitely include links to that in the show notes for everybody and check it out myself. I'm trying to remember, there was this book that I read. I'll have to pull it up. There's some book I read maybe like 12 years ago, and it was talking, it just kind of got into those topics around all the additives and things like that, but how they're so meticulously trying to just optimize fat and sugar and everything in a certain way to kind of make them so you're never really fully satisfied and you want a little bit more, because it's always about quantity, right? And then you're like, you get the most value, but then you can plow through a bag of potato chips or something because it's just, they've gamed us,
Yes. Yeah. It talks about the Pringle as an example of like the perfect snack, where it's like the shape of the Pringle is perfectly designed so that it lays on your tongue, just like it's just shaped perfectly to like, so every bit of your tongue is like capturing the slight saltiness and the texture, like it's just capturing it. And then it breaks apart and it dissolves so quickly and so well that once you finish chewing, all you're left with is this little pulp of chip, like this little pulp of potato. It's not even all potato. It's like partly potato, partly flour, partly like other things. But you're left with like so little to swallow that you eat it and you're not satisfied because you basically ate air. And then you eat the next potato chip and you go through the same process. You eat basically nothing. And then before you know it, you've eaten the whole can of Pringles. And I was like, oh my God, that is exactly what happens. Like, that's exactly
You can't eat just one is by design.
You can't. Yep. Once you pop, you just can't stop. Yep.
And where can listeners best follow your thoughts and ruminations about software engineering, development, and community building and additional streams of revenue and income online?
So I have a newsletter where I write all these things, and let me see if I can find it. It's the multi-hyphenate. It's a ConvertKit site. It is the multi-hyphenate.ck.page/newsletter. I'll send the link over. But that is where I write every week, and I write about updates about like my life. I'm bipolar, and I talk a lot about my own mental health journey and my own mental health struggles. So I talk a lot about like nothing that's like trigger warning worthy, but I talk about things that have worked and things where I'm struggling. I talk about being a parent and having a little baby girl. She's not really a baby, she's 2 now. Oof. But yeah, so I talk a lot and I give like updates on like my travels and work and that kind of thing. So you can catch up with me on my newsletter. And then if you're interested in learning more about BCM, by the time this goes live, it will be officially rebranded to Disco Club is going to be the new name. But you can check out the cohort and all the stuff that we're doing. Our AMAs are free and open to the public. Our master classes are free to members and they're paid, but they are open to the public. So if you want to catch some of the events that we're doing, you're welcome to join and check it out and see if you want to join the community.
Wonderful. I'll definitely include links to all those in the show notes for everybody. And with that, it's been such a delight having you join us on Maintainable, Saron. Thank you so much for stopping by to talk shop with us.
Thank you for having me.